Welcome. This is my analysis of this full moon in Aquarius. I always look at the heart of the chart where all the aspect patterns are and what I consider is the sacred geometry. And before going into the full moon analysis, I just wanted to come back to the new moon because the moons are always in pairs from the cycle. So the cycle began with this new moon. And if you haven't already watched the analysis I did for the new moon, you may want to pause and go catch that one before coming back to this, because there are some of the same constituents in the patterns for this full moon as there were for the new moon pattern. And before getting into the pattern, I just wanted to reflect on what a full moon is. It's an opposition. And I have this quote here from Stephen Forrest's book, The Book of the Moon. He points out that we are at the midpoint of the bright hemicycle, which is what I just mentioned about us being in the middle of a cycle that started with the new moon. And he talks about this being the point at which we are fully extended into the world of manifestation. So here is the opposition between the sun and the moon. And the moon is called the sustainer and the sun the creator in the book Astrology for Yourself by Douglas Block and Demetra George. I use the titles for the planets from that book. So first we're going to look from the moon's point of view in this opposition. The moon is sitting at Aquarius 27 degrees and 15 minutes, which in the Sabian symbols, which is a symbolic picture for each of the 360 degrees of the zodiac, the Sabian symbol is always rounded up. So that is Aquarius 28. This is just a summation or a brief introduction to the symbol for this degree. If you want to look at the full explanation, you can go and visit jamesburgess.com, which is the site that I use, which is excellent. And this is a mix of James's interpretation or additional insight, as well as the original input from Dane Rudhyar. So Dane Rudhyar's description is at the top, and then James's narrative for the symbol. So the symbol for the moon is a tree felled and sawed to ensure a supply of wood for winter, and James gives the summation of that as expanding perception in order to see more deeply. So this is the moon's point of view. Now we're going to look at the sun's point of view. Many little birds on the limb of a big tree. And James's summation is focusing upon optimal opportunity. So let's go back to the moon now. So we have the moon expanding perception in order to see more deeply, and the sun at the other end focusing upon optimal opportunity. So we've started with them, and many astrologers have spoken about the T-square, which is this. It's the opposition and the two tight squares going to Uranus, who's known as the awakener. And as you can see, there's only 4 minutes in it, which is why there's a lot of focus being put on this T-square in this new moon. Not just this T-square, there's 2 T-squares, but I'll get into that. When I heard about there being a T-square, I thought, okay, I wonder if there is what is called a grand cross. And indeed there is. And the point that gives us 4 points, so we've got the 3 points of the T-square, and the 4th point is created with an asteroid called Destin. It is what it says on the tin. And there's a little write-up here which I found really useful, that Destin is actually named after a Czech opera singer whose name was Destin. And this astrologer has found that this asteroid actually correlates with what you might call destiny, but she talks about it being destiny that you create for yourself, or that you follow yourself, or you self-select, your self-selected destiny. And she's written in here some correspondences that you can pause and read. So the reason I put this in here is when you look at this, Destin is sitting at Scorpio 2715, exactly to the minute square this full moon. So I've called Destiny Diva because diva opera singers are divas, and I'm not meaning diva-ish behavior, but that they are divas. And these are the squares to the exact squares to the sun and moon. And then of course the opposition to Uranus, which only has 4 minutes as well. So this is a very strong grand cross. It's a fixed grand cross because it connects all the fixed signs in the zodiac. I've just highlighted the tightness with the orbs. The fixed grand cross holds a great deal of internal tension that tends to explode with great force under extreme pressure. So, as this kind of indicates with the red energy and activating energy. And then from the aspect pattern astrology, this is called an achievement square rather than a grand cross or an efficiency square. And it's made up of achievement triangles. And what I love is that it says because it is made up of achievement triangles, everything becomes possible. And if something doesn't work, then you'll do it again. So now we're going to look at break down this grand cross. We've already done the moon and the sun, and now this is Uranus's point of view. A woman past her change of life experiences a new love, and the headline is maturity in relationships. And now to Destiny Diva. We have the king of the fairies approaching his domain. Awareness of our deepest yearnings. And I find it interesting that she's sitting at the degree of inner sovereignty when you consider that she is connected to the destiny that we choose for ourselves. So here we have it, a summary of the headlines for this very strong fixed grand cross. I'm just going to walk through how I process these patterns. So first I will look at where the grand cross lands in my chart. So here is a summary of all of the houses that I have borrowed from the Astrology podcast website, and I have highlighted those houses that these 4 points are touching for me. Where are they touching for you? And then I've put together the headlines for each. So the title of the planet, for example, the sustainer for the moon, the headline from the Sabian symbol, expanding perception in order to see more deeply, and then the house, which is, for me, it's my first house, which is about self, body, character, and appearance. And with this and looking at this, trying to glean what the influences and what the message is of this grand cross for me specifically, because I've got it in the houses that it touches in my chart. So I have the sustainer in the house of my body and appearance and my essential identity, then the awakener in my roots and family, the house of my roots and family and private life. The creator is in my house of partnerships, one-to-one relationships. And then Destiny Diva is in my house of career. Wow, what a place to have destiny. The next step I take with breaking down the influence of these patterns for me is to look at what planets or points do I have within at any of the points within the pattern. And the only planets and points I have is Neptune at the same point as Destiny, and Calliope, which I will cover in a minute, is also my natal. Calliope is tightly conjunct my Neptune. I just discovered by doing this exploration, in fact. So both of those are closely conjunct where Destin is. I just wanted to take a little diversion to talk about the zodiac lotus that I use. And I use this lotus as a foundation to create artistic charts for people. So I just wanted to make you aware of that in case this is something that resonates with you, and if you're drawn to this representation of a chart. This is my own chart that I did quite a while ago, and it was one of my first artistic charts that I did. Back to the patterns. So we've covered the first very strong fixed grand cross, but that isn't the only grand cross in this full moon chart. The first grand cross has Uranus, and Uranus is one of the co-rulers of Aquarius. Saturn is the original ruler and is the other co-ruler of Aquarius. So Uranus is involved in the first fixed grand cross, and Saturn is involved in this mutable grand cross. And it goes, Saturn is in Pisces, Saturn the teacher, and is opposite Venus, the goddess of love, with just 32 minutes in the opposition. They are then square to Jupiter. I've called Jupiter the expander. In the Douglas Block and Demetra George book, it actually says principle of improvement, but I've chosen to call Jupiter the expander for it to be a like for like with the other titles. So here we have again another pretty tight T-square. So 2 minutes between Saturn and Jupiter and 34 minutes between Venus and Jupiter. And again, I have found the other fourth point, and this is Calliope, who is one of the muses, and she's the muse of epic poetry. So it's really interesting that my own natal Calliope is involved in the first Grand Cross, and Calliope makes up the fourth point of this mutable Grand Cross. And here are the squares to Venus and Saturn. And while they're not as tight as the other aspects, it's still pretty tight because they're all under 2 degrees. Mutable energy makes the mutable Grand Cross rather like a dancer in constant motion. So how appropriate that we have the goddess of love and the muse of epic poetry involved in this Grand Cross that has the energy like a dancer in constant motion. So again, I have looked at where does this touch my chart, and where it touches my chart is Saturn here is sitting on the exact degree, 17 degrees 28 minutes, that my Mars sits in Scorpio. So my Mars is at 17 degrees 28 minutes of Scorpio. So I have an exact trine from this Saturn in the mutable Grand Cross. And I have the Sabian symbol here for the degree of Saturn in this mutable Grand Cross. Pisces 1728 becomes Pisces 18 for Sabian symbols. So, in a gigantic tent, villagers witness a spectacular performance. The headline is Be Entertainer, Teacher, and Priest. This is the degree that Saturn, the teacher, is sitting on. Be Entertainer, Teacher, and Priest, Saturn, the teacher. There is a third Grand Cross, a cardinal Grand Cross. Cardinal energy is centrifugal, making the cardinal Grand Cross like a dynamo. And it starts with the North Node, which I've called the Soul Mission or Soul Direction. 44 minutes in opposition with Makemake. Makemake I have called the Innovator, following the description of Makemake in the chart from Alan Clay in his book, New Stars for a New Era. They are square Quawa. Again, another new dwarf planet on the scene. And again, following Alan Clay's narrative, I have called Quawa the dynamo. And I had actually called Quawa the dynamo way before I even dug out this reference to the Cardinal Grand Cross. So the energy of the Cardinal Grand Cross has Quawa, the dynamo, in it, and it has an energy like a dynamo. For me, is like a double energy. The fourth point is an asteroid called Opportunity. This is the largest orb out of all of the orbs for all of the Grand Crosses at 2 degrees 14. Anything under 3 degrees orb is considered pretty close as an aspect. And then Opportunity is square, the North Node, and Makemake. Where do any of these points hit my chart? My moon is conjunct or co-joined Opportunity. Opportunity is at 10 degrees 23 minutes, and my moon is at 9 degrees 53 minutes. and in my 5th house. So here is the write-up for the degree that opportunity is sitting on. Cancer 11, a clown caricaturing well-known personalities. So, and I love this, employing the subtle power of laughter, diminishing the influence of our role models. Putting this all together. Here is the mutable Grand Cross overlaid with where it touches my chart. And here is the Cardinal Grand Cross overlaid with where it touches my chart. And adding in the Sabian symbol narrative and the house as well. To get clarity, I've grayed out the parts where it doesn't touch my chart, even though it still applies because it touches a house. I've highlighted out where there is a planet or point where it touches one of the points of one of the grand crosses. So I end up with the 10th house because the Saturn here is actually speaking to my 10th house. Even though it's speaking from the 2nd house, it's to the 10th house. So it's 10th house and 5th house for me, where I interpret the majority of the influence from these grand crosses come into my life. So I've now added in here the summary of the Sabian symbol for my natal placement. So this is for my Mars and Scorpio, it's about self-transformation and freeing myself from patterns of limiting belief. And then Neptune and Calliope, because they're on the same degree, is prayer as a force that brings peace, which is intense emotional focus. Take a helicopter view and look at the whole picture. What is this message to me? It's about being a teacher, but that says entertainer, teacher, and priest. And the entertainer part is underlined by opportunity, which, if you recall, was about laughter. That was its first line, was about laughter. And then the priest part is underlined by this prayer as a force that brings peace. And then obviously doing the work internally first. And I can relate to this so much. I've been going through a lot of this at the, this month in particular. The last one is my moon is undergoing intense training in self-improvement, which again, it just echoes what is over here, self-transformation. Where do these 3 grand crosses touch your chart? Where do they land? What natal planets or points are involved with one of the points of any of the grand crosses? And how do you interpret the symbolic messages that go with them? Like I said, you can go to jamesburgess.com, which covers all of the Sabian symbols, and you always round up to the next degree. That's my analysis and interpretation of this powerful Aquarius full moon. And if you're interested in getting a chart made for you, pop me a message and we will hop on a Zoom, because I always have a discussion first. It's no obligation, and it's because what I'm creating is really quite sacred, and I approach it with that level of reverence. That's it for now. From my heart's light to yours. So much love.